Greetings, dear viewer, and welcome to Purposes Crossed, where I hope that people who are called by Jesus for different purposes cross paths and exchange ideas. In this video, we continue with our series of devotions on the Psalms, and today we will deal with Psalm 31. Psalm 31 is a reasonably long psalm with 24 verses that indicate a long period during which the psalmist cried to Yahweh for help. The psalm begins with a strong declaration that the psalmist has taken refuge in Yahweh. This idea of taking refuge in Yahweh, or of Yahweh being a rock of refuge, appears 3 times in the first 4 verses itself. But then the psalmist seems to forget this as he focuses on those who worship idols. In this entire midsection of the psalm, the idea of Yahweh being a refuge is all but absent. But then in verse 19, the psalmist once more and quite abruptly brings to mind the idea that Yahweh is his refuge, and from then on, the psalm proceeds with a recollection of Yahweh's deliverance and a word of encouragement to those who listen to the psalm. It is important to observe that there is no smooth transition between verse 18 and verse 19. The switch from describing how he would like God to deal with his enemies to the confidence of receiving abundant good things from God is jarring, to say the least. What can explain this? But before we get down to answering that, it pays to observe the difference between how the psalmist describes his relationship to Yahweh and the relationship his adversaries have with the idols. Whereas he says that he takes refuge in Yahweh, or that Yahweh is his refuge, those who worship idols are said to cling to them. The different words chosen tell a wonderful story. Yahweh is real and hence can provide actual protection for the psalmist. Hence, there is a mutuality to the relationship. The psalmist goes to Yahweh to take refuge in him, and in return, Yahweh proves to be up to the task of being a refuge for the psalmist. However, when describing those who worship idols, we see that there is a one-sided relationship. The humans cling to their idols, but there is no reciprocation on the part of the idols. How could there be? After all, the idols are nothing. They are human creations, and so even though the humans cling to them, it is as though they are desperately clinging to a sinking ship. But the psalmist has human adversaries as well, and these adversaries are very real. Even if the idols they worship are empty and worthless, the humans themselves are real, and they are able to plot against the psalmist. The opposition he faced was real, and he even likens it to be a near-death experience. But he thanks Yahweh by saying, "Yet you heard my cry for mercy when I called to you for help." Unlike some psalms of lament that end with a dark note, Psalm 31 ends on a positive note. But as we have observed, the transition from verse 18 to verse 19 is quite abrupt. How can we explain it? You see, Psalm 31 tells us that it is okay for us to recognize and acknowledge the evils around us. And if we actually have enemies working against us, we should admit that they could potentially thwart our plans. For Yahweh does not promise his people that their plans will succeed. But in the midst of these attacks from those who oppose us, we should recognize that there are no gods who are able to oppose Yahweh. If something happens to us, it is because Yahweh permitted it, not because some god has proven to be more powerful than Yahweh, for there is no one who can successfully oppose Yahweh. But the problem with us is that if we focus on those who are opposing us, there is no end to that line of thinking. All we will end up doing is go round and round in circles, endlessly repeating and reliving all the bad things that have happened to us as a result of the actions of those who act against us. The only way to break the cycle is to shock ourselves out of this circular reasoning and once again acknowledge Yahweh's love for us. This is why there is a sudden break, for Psalm 31 gives us an example not just what we should do, but also how we should do it. But here it is important to recognize that this does not mean that we should just ignore what is happening around us. We should not short-circuit the process. If there are people against us, ignoring them is not an appropriate course of action, for then we would not be in a position to appreciate Yahweh's deliverance when it comes. You see, a true appreciation of what Yahweh does for us requires us to be honest about our situation. If we deny the reality of how bad things are, we will never understand how much grace we have received. So Psalm 31 gives us permission to acknowledge how bad things really are before shocking ourselves back to recognizing the reality of Yahweh's love.